Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Telephone Town Hall. I'm Stephanie Lee, President of the American Federation of Teachers, New Mexico. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the upcoming legislative session. We're currently dialing out to thousands of members across New Mexico, and we'll begin in a few minutes. For those just calling, my name is Stephanie Lee, and I'll be hosting tonight's call. We're currently dialing out 1,000 of members so they can hear about the upcoming legislative session. It will just take a few minutes to finish out the dialing out, so we're going to get started in just a moment. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Telephone Town Hall. I'm Stephanie Lee, President of the American Federation of Teachers, New Mexico. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the upcoming legislative session. We're currently dialing out to thousands of members across New Mexico, and we'll begin in a few minutes. For those just joining, this is Stephanie Lee, and I'll be hosting tonight's call. We're currently dialing out to thousands of members so that they can hear about the upcoming legislative session. It will just take a few minutes, so we're going to get started in just a moment. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Telephone Town Hall. I'm Stephanie Lee, President of the American Federation of Teachers, New Mexico. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the upcoming legislative session. We're currently dialing out to thousands of members across New Mexico, and we'll begin in just a few minutes. For those just joining, this is Stephanie Lee, and I'll be hosting tonight's call. We're currently dialing out to thousands of members so they can hear about the upcoming legislative session. It will just take a few minutes, so we're going to get started in a moment. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Telephone Town Hall. I'm Stephanie Lee, President of the American Federation of Teachers, New Mexico. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the upcoming legislative session. We're currently dialing out to thousands of members across New Mexico, and we'll begin in just a few minutes. For those just joining, this is Stephanie Lee, and I'll be hosting tonight's call. We're currently dialing out to thousands of members so they can hear about the upcoming legislative session. It will just take a few minutes to finish the dial out, so we're going to get started in just a moment. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Telephone Town Hall. I'm Stephanie Lee, President of the American Federation of Teachers, New Mexico. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the upcoming legislative session. We're currently dialing out to thousands of members across New Mexico, and we'll begin in just a few minutes. For those just joining, this is Stephanie Lee, and I'll be hosting tonight's call. We're currently dialing out to thousands of members so they can hear about the upcoming legislative session. It will just take a few minutes to finish the dial out, so we're going to get started in just a moment. Good evening. My name is Stephanie Lee, and I'm the President of the American Federation of Teachers, New Mexico. And I'm very proud to welcome each of you as participants on tonight's call. Over the next 75 minutes, you will have an opportunity to hear directly from our New Mexico legislative leaders in two separate formats. First, we will hear from Senate Majority Leader Peter Wirth and Speaker of the House Brian Egolf about their chamber's priorities for public education in New Mexico, from early education through higher education, and also detail some of their positions on labor issues and workers' rights. The second portion of tonight's call will be a series of issues and questions submitted by AFT New Mexico members who are actively working in our schools and institutions of higher ed. During the portion, we will hear from other lawmakers about some of their ideas on these important issues and any legislation they plan to introduce to address these critical topics. In addition to the dozens of questions already submitted by AFT New Mexico members from across the state, if you think of a question during the call, please email it to aftnm Tele-Town Hall, that's TELETOWNHALL, @gmail.com. That is AFTNMTELE Town Hall @gmail.com. If there is time, we will try to work in additional questions submitted via email. In addition to moderating tonight's call, I will also be the timekeeper. We want to be respectful of your time as well as the time of our legislators. Before we begin to hear from our lawmakers, we encourage you to press 1 now on your phones in order to opt in to AFT New Mexico's Rapid Text Program to stay up to date with news from our union. Let's begin our call by hearing from Senate Majority Leader Peter Wirth and the New Mexico Senate's vision for public education, labor issues, and workers' rights. Senator Peter Wirth represents Senate District 25, based in Santa Fe, and prior to his service in the Senate, he was a member of New Mexico House of Representatives. He also serves on both the Conservation and Judicial Committees. Welcome, Leader Wirth.
Thank you, Stephanie, and good evening, everyone. I want to start with just a huge thank you to each and every one of you who have called in and are part of AFT for all that you do to help our schools at every level. We've been through a pretty rough period, to say the least, and I don't think there have been enough thank yous. In fact, for 8 years under the prior administration, it was exactly the opposite. It was every effort to take away all the work that we'd done, and we were going backwards. I will never forget when I first became Senate Majority Leader in 2017, and we were in full-blown crisis. Our current Lieutenant Governor, who was then a state senator, Howie Morales, he said we'd reached the amputation phase, and boy, have we come a long way since then, and things have really changed. Let me start just at the top. Having a governor that actually wants to govern in Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham has made an extraordinary difference. We had a session this year in 2019 that was truly historic in many, many areas, but a huge piece of the history that was made was the moonshot for education, which took a giant step at kind of getting us back to where we need to be. After 10 years of cuts, the money that was invested into the public schools to help at all different levels, to help teachers with salaries and all the different things, was something that was extraordinary, and it was the result of a collaborative effort here at the legislature internally between our education committees and our finance committees. And I'll be honest with you, they haven't always worked collaboratively in the way they did, but the leadership in both the House and the Senate on the Education Committee and the Finance Committee coming together resulted in what's the first step in what has to be a huge push for education. So in terms of where we're going, we have an opportunity with the windfall that has come from oil and gas to continue to rebuild education at all levels. I want to start with early childhood. One of the things that we were able to do even during down years was increase funding for early childhood education. What we haven't done, though, is gone to the permanent fund, and that's been an ongoing discussion that we've had at the legislative level. This upcoming session, there's a proposal for an early childhood permanent fund, a new permanent fund, which I think has been received very warmly at the legislative level, and certainly it's been proposed by Governor Lujan Grisham. So in effect, what it would do is create a new fund so that we then have dollars that spin off every year on a rolling return for early childhood education. So that's step one. Step two, the moonshot has not ended. I think that there is no question we need to continue to put money into the overall funding formula. There's some frustration in that it's hard for us to direct exactly how that money goes once it goes through. But again, that's something we're committed to doing. And then I want to be really clear in giving a shout out to an educational group that I think has been left behind to a large extent in our effort to rebuild, and it's higher ed. Higher ed, again, going back to 2017, we actually had the governor eliminate the whole higher education budget all into totality, along with the legislature's budget, kind of full crisis. But we need to step up for higher ed. And I know we've got new members of AFT now who are coming online at our higher education institutions, and I just want to make sure that that message is delivered, that we understand that this has to happen at all levels. So I just want to wish everyone a super happy holidays, lots to be thankful for. I encourage you to all spend time up at the Capitol. You have a great leadership team here at AFT. That do a terrific job working with us. But the other thing that makes a huge difference is when you reach out to your own legislators in your districts, spend the time with them. That happened for me here in Santa Fe, and I'll tell you what, hearing directly from those that are in the trenches at all levels makes a big difference for me. So again, Stephanie, the whole AFT team, and all AFT members, thank you for what you do, and just know that you've got a lot of supporters here at the Capitol, and we look forward to continuing this new era that we're in and really this new focus on education.
Thank you, Leader Wirth, for your words. Our next guest is Brian Egoff, the Speaker of New Mexico House of Representatives. He represents District 47 in Santa Fe and has been a member of the House since 2009. In addition to being Speaker, he serves on the House Judiciary and the Taxation and Revenue Committee. Welcome, Speaker Egoff.
Hi, everybody. First of all, Stephanie, thank you so much for the invitation to be here and for the chance to visit with so many teachers, educators, and your members. I want to also just not thank you, but I want to thank all your members for everything that you all do every day to help lift up New Mexico's kids and families. The work that you do in our schools around the state is often, seldom if ever, gets the accolades and the credit that you deserve. But without you and your hard work, we would not have the future that you've helped bring through your hard work. So thanks to each and every member of AFT for helping all of our families all over New Mexico. And I also want to say those of us in the House over the last several years spent a period of 2 years in the minority and saw all of the attacks that came on education. And I want to thank the entire union for standing with us, helping us win back the House, and helping us, after we won back the House, to remember to always keep a laser focus on improving education, improving the working conditions for educators and teachers and all of your members, making sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to give you the best income, the best quality of life that we possibly can in the state. And Stephanie and the entire AFT leadership team is making sure that we're staying focused on that. It's truly the least that we can do to show you how much we respect and honor your hard work. Right now, as Leader Wirth said, our opportunities are without precedent in our modern history. To have the revenue that we have, to have the Governor Lujan Grisham in office with her vision and her willingness to lead after 8 years of stagnation is exciting. It also means that we need to make smart decisions. The education moonshot, it's a metaphor that we use a lot. We like to say the moonshot was fueled and launched, but we have a long way to go. And $500 million in a single year and pay raises were a good start, but I know that Leader Wirth the leadership in both chambers and the governor feel that we made a good down payment on what we hope are many years of increased funding for education and increased salaries for all of you. We should highlight one of our highlighted bills from last session. It was House Bill 20, the Grow Your Own Teachers Act, because we know that we do best as a state when our educators when our students have every opportunity to grow up and become teachers themselves, and we want to incentivize that as much as we can. But even, as I said, with the investments, a lot more needs to be done. Phase 2 of the Moonshot is going to launch this next coming January. You're going to hear from members of the House, Christine Trujillo, Patricia Roybal-Caballero, and Joy Garrett, and maybe Liz Thompson. I'm not sure if she's going to be speaking. But they're all working on these issues, and a big part of that, as we address education, as we address the issues that were rightly raised in the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit and the judge's order in that case, as we address all of this, one of the most important inputs into our thinking, one of the most important things that we need to, as we make legislative decisions on education, is the input from you. The input from Stephanie and the leadership is critically important, but I also like nothing more than to hear from educators in the district I represent, which happens to be NEA, so please, don't hold it against them. But I love hearing from teachers because I'm not an educator myself, and nothing helps me to make a better decision than hearing from someone who spends their career educating children in the classroom. So please continue to reach out. You can find all of our email addresses and phone numbers at nmlegis.gov. Please take an opportunity to do that. And there's no way that we could have made it this far without being shoulder to shoulder every step of the way with AFT. And your vision helps inform our decisions. And it has been a wonderful partnership that I hope will continue for many, many years to come as we work to improve the lives of New Mexico's children, families, and our teachers and educators and members of AFT. So thank you again, Stephanie, for the opportunity to participate, offer some comments, and now we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Speaker Eagle. And again, just would like to thank both of you for sharing some of your educational goals for the session. As we transition to the next part of the call, I would like to remind listeners to press 1 now to opt in to our rapid texting program and also submit any questions for the lawmakers by emailing AFT Tele, that's T-E-L-E, townhall@gmail.com. On to the next portion of the call, which will be a series of issues and questions that have been submitted by rank-and-file members from across the state. I will read the question and provide a little bit of background about the issue, and then invite our legislators to address and answer your questions. Question number 1, Student Debt Bill of Rights, and it is, predatory student debt lenders and practices have led to a debt crisis not only in New Mexico, but also throughout the country. You recently wrote an editorial in the Albuquerque Journal talking about this issue and how it impacts New Mexico's borrowers, especially borrowers of color and women. Can you talk about what you hope to achieve in New Mexico with your proposed legislation seeking to address this issue? And this is actually for Representative Patricia Roybal-Caballero, who actually is home sick today, but she did write an answer to this question, and Representative Joy Garrett will read that out loud.
Thank you, Stephanie. So on behalf of Representative Roybal-Caballero, she states that first and foremost, I want to convey that we're standing up and protecting New Mexicans by taking action to end the student debt crisis so that those with those debts can focus on pursuing the careers of their choice and achieve economic mobility. When students applied for financial aid loans, it was with the understanding It would lead to completing their education and opportunities and not lead to financial ruin. Governor Lujan Grisham has proposed free college tuition in our state, which would go far in bringing down the price tag of attendance. However, right now, 218,000 plus New Mexicans are trying to pay back the money they borrowed to attend college. This existing $7 billion in student loan debt burdens both New Mexicans' rural and urban students, from teenagers to senior citizens. When borrowers try to repay their loans, they're facing roadblock after roadblock for their loan servicers. Student loan servicers are legally responsible for providing people with the correct repayment information and actually helping borrowers access the affordable repayment plans that they have a right to under federal law. However, complaints to consumer protection agencies show a systemic practice of steering borrowers away from these plans and leaving them in even greater debt. For example, a lawsuit against Navient, one of the largest loan servicers, showed that these practices have cost borrowers nationally $4 billion. These companies are almost completely unregulated, and borrowers are navigating a complicated repayment process often defined by unscrupulous and predatory practices. From misapplied payments to lost paperwork to misinformation from customer service reps, borrowers are fighting an uphill battle against servicers who cannot even get the basics right. Thus, thousands of New Mexicans are missing out on the ability to buy houses, save for retirement, start a business, or even start a family. The impact is even broader than that. Student debt drives income, wealth, and racial inequality across our state. These predatory practices cost New Mexican borrowers thousands of dollars every year. Teachers are getting saddled with debt that should have been discharged. Military members, too, are being blocked from accessing the financial protections they earn through service to our country. Too often, communities of color are hit the hardest by these predatory lending practices and disproportionately face loan servicing breakdowns. So, this legislative session, we can join nearly a dozen other states in making the student loan market more fair for New Mexicans. Now's the time for our leaders to come to institute meaningful reforms and protections to ensure that borrowers can get out of debt and prosper financially. Adopting a New Mexico Student Loan Bill of Rights would provide student borrowers with the same protections our state has for other lenders and help families and communities avoid financial ruin. It would require student loan companies to be licensed and regulated by our state, just as we have long required of mortgage servicers and other debt collectors. And this is Representative Roybal Caballero, looks forward to your support and standing strong with you to ensure the passage of this incredibly important and valuable legislation. And that's her statement.
Thank you very much, Representative Garrett, for sharing the words from Representative Roybal Caballero. Our next question is addressed to Representative Christine Trujillo. During the interim session, you have been the chairwoman of the Legislative Education Study Committee, and it is clear that many of your speakers and topics have been seeking to address work still needing to be completed in the response to the Martinez-Yazzie lawsuit. Can you share what new insights you have made during this study period and what legislation we might expect to see this session as a result?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be here. It has been a very long process and a very interesting experience to be LESC chair. I did get the opportunity, however, to create the agendas, and my goal was to make sure that people that are normally not included or are not given enough time to do presentations to the committee were given ample time to do that. And so I invited many speakers and authorities, accomplished educators to come in and speak to us about why it was so important to have included multicultural education, bilingual education in our classrooms. The lawsuit clearly stated we were not doing what was right by providing them with resources and support to ensure that they had positive academic outcomes. And I believe that based on the comments from my colleagues on the committee and others, that they feel that they've learned a lot more about the process. Sometimes we only get information in snippets, and so we're asked to not only create legislation, but vote for legislation based on those snippets. What I've tried to do is make sure that everybody knows what's going on and is well prepared to make, I think, thoughtful decisions. So we had many Native American speakers, directors of ethnic studies. We've had folks who teach multicultural languages, and all of these folks were from many of the pueblos and native tribes in New Mexico, as well as representatives from a variety of different regions in New Mexico that represent Spanish and English. Because those are the dominant languages. The bottom line is that we've also had, I think, a lot of success in folks stating that they want to carry legislation that will help ensure that the money that is supposed to be appropriated to those studies, not to those studies, but to those groups and to those school districts is actually going to go forward. And what we have to do, and I'd ask for your support as we start dropping legislation, that you start looking on the legislative website to see what the legislation is and start calling your legislators and senators to support legislation. What we don't want to do is have the problem that we had last year when we had a bottleneck and, I guess, conflicting interests in trying to get the House legislation to the Senate and the Senate legislation into the House. What we have to do is work better together to make sure that we are fulfilling the mandates of that court case.
Great. Thank you very much, Representative. Our next question is regarding school transportation issues, and this is for Senator Jeff Steinborn. One of the main issues we hear from school employees, especially those in the southern part of the state, is about the extreme heat in school buses. You've long advocated for the issue of air conditioning in buses, and while your bill in 2019 didn't pass the state Senate, permission was included for districts to use transportation funding for purchase of air conditioning. But that permission didn't make it mandatory, nor did the permission cover privately owned bus fleets. Can you talk about this issue not only in the context of the greater summertime bus needs from extended learning programs, but also any new information you can share on how you're planning to approach this issue in future legislative sessions? Senator?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. It's an honor to join you. I'm State Senator Jeff Steinborn, and I stepped out of a board meeting that I'm chairing to hop on the call because this issue is really important to me, and I appreciate you inviting me to speak to you about it. So yes, we made this has long been an issue, and it's just getting more so, particularly in really hot parts of our state. Bus temperatures inside that bus have been measured well over 100 degrees. And of course, we have AFT members and, drivers who are there for hours on end in Las Cruces. It's been reported to me that we had 3 drivers last year that passed out after their shift. And so this is a really critical safety issue for the drivers and for the kids. And now with K plus extended learning, we're starting them a month longer in the heat of the summer just absolutely brutal. And so last year, I mean, I have tried throughout the last several years to put language in budgets saying that they, had to do this, that they should do this, and these capital outlay bills that fund new buses. And last year I was just determined to get it done, and came to understand that from a legislative side of things, that there's the way we fund school district-owned buses is different than the way the legislature funds contractor-owned buses, districts that hire private contractors to do it. Regardless, the legislature, the state, pays 100% of those transportation costs essentially. And so it is something that has to come from the state. And if we're going to mandate this increase in equipment, we have to provide the money for it. And that became crystal clear to me. And so last year I worked to not only put in the requirement, but also to appropriate the money. And so where that ended up succeeding was in the capital outlay bill that funded district-owned buses. We did get language in there that mandated that in districts, the language says in districts where the temperature is regularly hot enough to pose a safety risk, that they shall buy equipment, or it might be stronger than be authorized to, kind of optional, but that they shall get that, new buses, not retrofit, but with air conditioning. The bill that would have made it mandatory for everybody did die on the Senate floor. It was a little bit kind of shocking, like minutes after we passed a tax credit for Boeing. But nonetheless, we raised, I think, more awareness to the issue, and of course, we got a good start with the district-owned buses this year. So happens that a lot of the contractor-owned buses are in southern New Mexico, in the Las Cruces Public Schools, Luna County and Deming area, Carlsbad area, I want to say Clovis perhaps. So it so happens in the hotter parts of the state or the hottest parts of the state is where they have these contractor-owned buses. And so recently I had a really good meeting with the officials at the Public Education Department, and I spoke with the new secretary as well. And I can tell you that they are very strongly moving in this direction, particularly because of extended learning, and are considering how to do that up into including making it a requirement for new equipment, just understanding. But also they were submitting their budget to the executive to possibly include more funds. There's a discussion over how far do you cast that net? Do you require this on equipment statewide? Do you limit it to the districts that are in the hotter areas? That's a discussion. At the legislature, some legislators, I should say, vocally said, well, my schools don't need it because it's cool up here, which is debatable on some days. As climate changing makes things hotter everywhere and we have extended learning, you could argue probably there's not any place in the state that doesn't have those days. And I certainly know people who can afford air conditioning have it probably in every car, in every part of the state, if they can afford it. So I think there's a little bit of hypocrisy here, not somehow extending that same courtesy and safety precaution to schools and buses and kids and drivers. And so I think where the ball stands right now is, and I have a call out to the Education Department, I try to get an update for this call. It's very possible that in the executive, the governor's recommendation right now, they are trying to get more money for this, because we have a ton of buses that are about to cycle, and reaching the end of their life, particularly in Las Cruces schools, and this is kind of a very timely moment. So number one, there could be money. They could be looking at possible rule changes to require this, and it is rules that govern contractor-owned buses particularly, and again, we have that language for the district-owned buses. But having said that, let's say for purposes of the discussion that no leadership comes from the Public Education Department at this moment on this issue. Absolutely, we will be working on it. I would, if it's the right thing to do, introduce the bill again as the vehicle to make this happen. And I really will welcome and need the support of all of you and AFT and everyone to lean on your legislators and identify those few folks who voted against this last time and get them on the right side of this issue, just as a safety issue for their kids and their drivers. And we'll get this done. I think we're almost at a tipping point of making this happen. And with that, happy to answer any questions from anybody.
Thank you, Senator Steinborn. We'll go on to the next question, and if more questions come up, if we have time, we will ask them. So this next question is for Senator Mimi Stewart, and it is, in 2019, the legislature approved the repeal of the A through F school grading system, Senate Bill 229, a piece of legislation that you carried. This has made a great improvement on the well-being of our students and communities that we work with as educators. Can you share with us any lessons you learned from that legislation, how you feel it's going in the field, and your ideas on potential next steps towards creating better well-being for our school communities? Senator Stewart.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. Can you hear me okay? I'm in my car driving back from Santa Fe, so I'm going to rely on my no-hands device to keep me safe. So the school grades came about, changing the school grades came about through a workforce, a task force that we put together. We had 26 people. We had superintendents, we had teachers, we had principals, we had some community organizations, we had PTA, we had both unions. Part of the task force was Ellen Bernstein, who is the president of the Albuquerque Teachers Federation, Jeff Tuttle, who is a third grade teacher at Monte Vista Elementary and a Fed rep through the union. We met for 18 months, and at that time, we used the LESC staff to help us actually hear from some experts and really look at how some other states do school grades. Our school grades previously were based solely on, for elementary at least, the results of the PARCC test score. The results of the tests that teachers couldn't see beforehand, couldn't keep a copy of, couldn't use to improve their own teaching, only had to do it as a high stakes. And that one test drove the school grading system. So our task force, made up of these 26 educators from all over the state, we were united in wanting to change that and make a school grade reflect our schools. I've been a teacher for 30 years. I'm retired now, but I know how important school climate is, how important collaboration with other teachers is, how important everybody is in that school. It doesn't work unless you work together. And I wanted to have a bill that would reflect that rather than one grade from a high-stakes test. And so what we came up with was this idea of a dashboard for every school or every district if you're small. And that dashboard would reflect your school. It would talk about what kind of teachers do you have, what kind of programs do you have, what are you proud of, what are you really promoting at your school, what are your challenges, and what are you doing to improve whatever you think you need to improve. Now, ESSA, our federal law, requires that every state tests children in grades 3 through 8 and once in high school. Under Martinez, we were doing a lot more than that. Under our great new governor, we've limited some of that testing. But ESSA still wants our public education departments at the state to identify schools in the bottom 5%, the bottom 20%, and for us to help those schools improve. And so the dashboard we're no longer going to have an A to F grade task board will talk about what the school needs to do to improve and what they're doing now. I'll give you an example. We had a superintendent from Deming on our task force, and he talked about they had a huge number of students who legally crossed Mexico into New Mexico to go to our school. And he was very proud of the way they communicated to their community, how they would do online teacher-parent conferences for parents that couldn't come across the border. They would do it all in bilingual. He was very proud of his school, and so that is going to be reflected in his school dashboard. The PED Deputy Secretary Tim Hand, who was helping us then, is kind of in charge of that, and they're working with contractors so that it's not something that every school has to devise themselves, but every school gets to help choose what's on that dashboard. The ESSA, the federal program, how much funding each school is getting. So this is a good way for a dashboard to represent that. I think the bill that we came up.
So right now, it seems as if Senator Stewart, we lost her. She's probably going down that dip on I-25, and if she gets back on, we can maybe loop her back in. But we'll move forward with the call, and like I said, if Senator Stewart, if she does get back in the area where we can hear her, we will put her back on. Our next question is for Representative Joy Garrett, and it's no secret that even after increased salaries and significant changes to education policy and culture at the New Mexico Public Education Department, there is still a need for teachers. One program showing promising initial results is the Grow Your Own Teachers Act, which Speaker mentioned earlier, which provides scholarships for qualified educational assistants to pursue their teaching degree. Can you share with the call any additional changes you are pursuing for this effort and what we can do to help it be successful for the long term? Representative?
Thank you, Stephanie. First, it was such a joy to pass this legislation. I've been teaching for 25 years. I'm still teaching. And the educational assistants I have had the privilege to work with were my inspiration for this bill. So I want to start by giving huge kudos to Higher Education Department Secretary Kate O'Neill and her team, because they ran with this legislation. It was enacted on the final day of the session on March 20th, and immediately the following week, her team started developing the rules and the communication that would make sure it was actually carried out. You always need someone to carry out your legislation. So by August, several dozen EAs could immediately start their education with scholarships only 5 months after it was passed. So that was great. And then the second issue that's come up as this legislation has been put into practice is communication. You need communication with educational assistants from districts and from the colleges of education or the community colleges that have the teacher certification courses. So there's been a tremendous mushrooming of communication over the last year to make sure that every EA in the state gets this information about this opportunity. As a result, Gallup-McKinley District and UNM Gallup have been collaborating on developing a program that speaks to the schedules and needs of EAs, making programs on Fridays and Saturdays and doing a lot of creative things. So across the state, this continues. There was one thing that we overlooked, though. Since the legislation passed on the final Saturday morning of the session, it got rushed. And what we realized, one item slipped through. That was the requirement to be an American citizen. Many of our educational assistants are legally able to work in New Mexico, but they're not American citizens. So during the 2020 session, I've already drafted legislation to amend the bill that anybody who can legally work in New Mexico is eligible to get the scholarship. I think that fix will just open the door. In speaking with Kate O'Neill, the secretary, and her team, they've seen a huge interest from around the state as news comes out about this opportunity. So our next goal is also getting the funding for it in the budget, but I think that the governor and her team, when they see the incredible difference and empowerment that educational assistants get from actually getting money to pay for their education, I think that they'll really support this. So that's the main fix that we need, that you do not have to be an American citizen. You just need to be legally qualified to work, and then you're eligible.
Wonderful representative. And we have Senator Stewart is back on the line. Sorry, Senator, we lost you for a couple minutes, but why don't you go ahead and continue talking about your great work with the A through F, repealing the A through F grading system.
Oh, thank you, Stephanie. I apologize for that. I'm not sure where I dropped off, but I'll essentially say that the PED is now contracting with someone that we will be using this dashboard, that everybody will get help to do it. We're going to be able to follow the new Every Student Succeeds Act as the rules that were going to be difficult, but with the dashboard we can do that. So I'm looking forward to looking at dashboards. We think that parents will like this a lot better than just getting one grade that's based on one test on a few days at the end of the year. So parents will be able to see who the teachers are. They'll be able to see if you've got a before or after school program. We have some schools that have a genius hour, using the last hour of the day for basically enhancing students' education. They're doing that in 3 schools in Albuquerque that I know of. And so the genius hour can be promoted on that dashboard. So when we had the old grading system, I had students who visited me in my office in Santa Fe, and they were so upset that their school got an F. These were 8th grade students who were going on to high school, and I had to really tell them, that doesn't mean anything. You're A students, you are going on to high school, so you did the right thing. Don't worry about that. That grade was very damaging to students, to teachers, to our education community. It really wasn't that great for neighborhoods and businesses who didn't want to talk about having an F school in their neighborhood. So that's gone. We now have a good way to talk about what we're doing with students. It's more fair to teachers. It's going to promote a good feeling in our schools. And that's what we really want to do in the legislature. I know the unions want to do that. We have to be much more positive about our schools. We have great schools, great teachers, and great kids. And we need to promote that. And I think this will help do that. So thank you so much, Stephanie, for coming back to me so I could wrap up. So I'll keep listening.
Thank you, Senator Stewart, and continue to drive safely. Our next question is for Senator Bill Souls, and it's regarding wages for educators. Public educators across New Mexico appreciated the investments made into education spending in the 2019 legislative session, including those made towards increases in salaries and hourly wages for all levels of public education in New Mexico. While it is still early, we are seeing less stress and potentially more people interested in entering education, or perhaps even staying in the classroom. Many legislators, especially those who are on the House and Senate Education Committees, have indicated that these investments are the first step. Can you tell us what you and other education leaders are advocating for this year for the public school employees?
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this Tele-Town hall. I'm a practicing teacher. I teach quarter time at Oñate. I feel like I always have all the good things about education. I don't have to do duty and some of the other things, just teaching part-time, but it makes sure that I'm in the classroom every day and I'm hearing from teachers every day. And they certainly are very thankful for the salary increases we were able to provide this last year. This last year, we were able to provide a minimum of 6% for all education public employees. And I think it worked out to an average of about 9%. The talk this next year, and among certainly the education leaders within the legislature, is that was not a one and done. That was the first step in several years of continued increases in wages for people working with our children, our most valuable assets in the state of New Mexico. The talk that we're getting now, and there's some people that are very different places, some out of the PED, Finance Committee, some of the others, they're talking at somewhere around an average of 3% salary increases. At the LESC meeting a week or so ago, I thought that was woefully inadequate. I proposed, and it was passed by the LESC, that we have a minimum of 3% salary increases for all public school employees and an average of 6%. The last time, because it was just an average, or a minimum salary, it caused some of what's called compression among districts in their salaries. And we need to deal with that some and give districts some flexibility to start expanding the salaries of the more seasoned employees. But we need to continue to work and keep up with our neighboring states. Texas raised their salaries about 5%. Colorado raises their salaries. Arizona is on track to raise their salaries over the next several years, and we know that lots of educators are mobile. And if we're going to keep the best and the brightest here in New Mexico, we have to remain competitive on salaries. We also know that quality teachers are the best indicator of quality education for our children. And if we're going to attract the best and the brightest into education, and if we're going to recruit, retain, and retrain all of our great teachers, then we know that takes money, and that takes money in salaries on the first side of it. That's the first step in doing all of the other things. You can't have great after-school programs. You can't have great programs in multicultural education. You can't have great programs in languages or STEM or arts if you don't have the teachers there to do so. And we have an incredible shortage of teachers. And if we're going to attract them into higher education to become teachers, if we're going to keep the teachers that we have, we must increase salaries. I think everyone, and I think the governor, in some of her public comments, is on board to have another fairly significant salary increase. I'm hoping to see that we have at least an average of 5%, and so hopefully quite a bit more. We know there's lots of money in the budget. Salaries are a recurring cost, but salaries really are an investment in the future of our state and an investment in our children. And that's where we need to be putting this extra money that we've got from oil and gas, is we need to be investing it. And once we invest in our teachers, we invest in our children, that investment never goes away with a downturn in Wall Street. You never take away a child's education. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak. I think you're going to find lots of the legislators who serve on the education committees are very committed to teachers and improving the wages and salaries for those people who are working with our most valuable assets, our children. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. So we are getting to the end. If we would encourage you to press 1 now on your phones in order to opt in to AFT New Mexico's Rapid Text program to stay up to date with the news from our union. I want to thank each of you who have spent some of your time with us this evening, and thank our elected officials for prioritizing this call within their very busy schedules. We have an opportunity in New Mexico to really change the trajectory of public education after the last 8 years. And we have heard ideas that will not only improve our profession, but most importantly, improve learning conditions and outcomes for our students, their families, and our communities. I encourage you to be involved during the legislative session and be a champion for public education in New Mexico. I appreciate the hard work each of you provide on a daily basis that benefits our students, places of learning, and our communities. At the conclusion of this call, we encourage you to stay on the line to be able to give immediate feedback about the conversation we just had. We look forward to hearing from each of you, so please make sure to stay on the line and give feedback. Thank you again for spending some of your night with us, and have a great night.